My greedy relatives thought my grandmother's death was their chance to seize her entire estate. They forgot Grandma had one last brilliant plan, and I was the executor chosen to make sure it went exactly as she intended. My grandmother's house always smelled like lavender and old books, a scent that clung to the mismatched teacups she collected and the worn-out armchair where she'd read me stories. In the week after she passed, that scent was suffocated by the cloying sweetness of funeral lilies and my Uncle Mark's overbearing cologne. He'd swept in like a minor monarch taking possession of a new territory, his voice booming through the quiet halls that were still heavy with grief. "Don't you worry, sis," he'd said to my mom, patting her shoulder with the force of a lumberjack. "Carol and I will get everything sorted." I was 26, with a decent job and a life of my own, but in Uncle Mark's eyes, I was perpetually 12. He and my Aunt Carol saw my quiet grief as weakness, a childlike fragility that needed their firm, guiding hand. They started making lists, earmarking furniture, and talking about liquidating assets before we'd even finished the sympathy casseroles. When I tried to mention that Grandma had told me she'd left specific instructions, Mark just chuckled. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, kiddo," he'd said, ruffling my hair. "It's complicated stuff. We'll handle it." The day her lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, called us all to her house for the reading of the will, the air was electric with tension. Mark sat in Grandma's armchair as if it were a throne, Aunt Carol perched on the armrest like a loyal vizier. My mom and I sat on the sofa, a small, quiet island in their sea of entitlement. Mr. Abernathy, a kind man with gentle eyes who'd known my grandmother for 40 years, cleared his throat. He read through a few small bequests, her beloved rose bushes to a neighbor, a small sum to her favorite charity. Then he got to the heart of it. As for the remainder of the estate, including the property at 12 Gable Lane, all savings, investments, and personal effects, I name my granddaughter as the sole beneficiary." Aunt Carol gasped. Mark shot to his feet. "Beneficiary? What about executor? Who's in charge of executing the will?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the small living room. Mr. Abernathy adjusted his glasses and looked down at the document. He read the next line with a slow, deliberate cadence that cut through Mark's bluster. "And to serve as the sole executor of this, my last will and testament, I appoint my trusted and beloved granddaughter." He looked up from the paper and straight at me. The silence was deafening. My uncle's face went from ruddy to a startling shade of purple. He turned to me, his eyes blazing, a sneer twisting his lips. "Okay," he said, his voice a low growl. "We need to have a little family meeting. Tomorrow, noon, here. We're going to sort this misunderstanding out." He thought he was giving an order. He thought he was laying a trap. He thought I would show up alone and intimidated, ready to hand over the keys to the kingdom. He had no idea that I spent the entire night on the phone, not with my friends for comfort, but with a law firm my boss had recommended. He wanted a meeting to handle it. Fine, we'd have a meeting, but I wouldn't be coming alone. The walk up to my grandmother's front door felt like marching into battle. The door swung open before my knuckles could even touch the wood. Uncle Mark stood there, filling the frame, his arms crossed over his chest like a bouncer at a cheap nightclub. "Good, you're on time," he grunted. "Let's get this over with." He clearly expected me to scurry past him, head bowed. I simply stepped aside. "Uncle Mark, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice surprisingly level. "This is Mr. Hayes, my legal counsel, a man in a perfectly tailored gray suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase, stepped forward and extended a hand. "Mark, a pleasure." Mr. Hayes's voice was calm, professional, and utterly devoid of intimidation. My uncle stared at the offered hand as if it were a dead fish, his jaw working silently. Aunt Carol appeared behind him, her perfectly coiffed hair looking a bit frazzled. "A lawyer. You brought a lawyer to a family chat? What on earth for?" "My client felt it was prudent given the financial and legal nature of the discussion," Mr. Hayes replied smoothly, retracting his hand without a hint of offense. He walked past them into the living room, and I followed, a newfound steel in my spine. We sat, the silence thick and hostile. Mark finally broke it, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Look, kiddo," he began, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "We know you're upset, but we need to be realistic. Grandma, she wasn't all there at the end. This whole executor thing is just a mistake, a fantasy. Carol and I have already done the heavy lifting. We've spoken to a realtor, got a preliminary appraisal. We will handle the sale of the house, pay off any of Grandma's little debts, and make sure you get a nice little nest egg to start your life with. It's what's best for the family. It's what she would have wanted." I let the silence hang for a moment after he finished his self-serving speech. Then I looked at Mr. Hayes, who gave me a barely perceptible nod. "No, Uncle Mark," I said, "that won't be happening. I will be fulfilling my duties as executor, precisely as my grandmother instructed in her legally binding will." Mark scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Duties? You can barely balance a checkbook. You'll drown in paperwork." "That's what I'm here for," Mr. Hayes interjected, placing his briefcase on the coffee table with a soft click. He opened it and pulled out a file. "My client is the legally appointed executor. Her authority in this matter is, for all intents and purposes, absolute." He slid a document across the table. "Here is a copy of the letters testamentary, issued by the court this morning. They formalize her position. Any and all decisions regarding the estate, are now hers to make. Aunt Carol snatched the paper, her eyes scanning it frantically. Mark's face was a thundercloud. "And our first official act," Mr. Hayes continued, his tone becoming sharp, "is to secure and consolidate all assets belonging to the estate." "The assets are secure," Mark boomed, gesturing around the room. "They're all right here." "Are they?" Mr. Hayes asked, his voice dropping an octave. He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out a second document. "Because among the things my client inherited were her grandmother's personal effects. All of them, including her meticulously kept financial ledgers from the past decade." He slid a single crisp sheet of paper toward my uncle. "According to this ledger, your grandmother gave you a personal loan of $50,000 2 years ago for a new business venture, a loan for which she noted 0 repayments." He paused, letting the words sink in. "As executor, my client is legally obligated to reclaim all outstanding debts owed to the estate. Consider this your formal notice. You have 30 days to repay the full amount plus accrued interest. After that, we begin collections." The silence that followed Mr. Hayes's announcement was more violent than any shout. Aunt Carol's face crumpled, her carefully constructed mask of pity dissolving into raw fury. Uncle Mark looked like he'd been physically struck. That was a gift," he stammered, his voice losing its booming authority. "A gift? From a mother to her son? How dare you?" "She wanted to help us with the business," Carol chimed in, her voice shrill. "Your grandmother would be rolling in her grave if she knew you were twisting her generosity into this blackmail." The word generosity lit a fire in my chest. I suddenly remembered a phone call from a year ago. Grandma's voice, quiet and strained. "He promised it was a sure thing, honey. I just hope he knows what he's doing. $50,000 is no small thing." She hadn't sounded generous. She had sounded worried. She had sounded like someone who felt she couldn't say no to her own son. "She told me she was worried about it, Uncle Mark," I said, my voice cutting through their protests. "She logged it as a loan because that's what it was. A loan you promised to pay back as soon as your business took off." Mr. Hayes calmly folded his hands on top of his briefcase. "The estate's records are quite clear," he stated, his gaze fixed on my uncle. "Written in your mother's own hand, dated, and with the stated purpose noted. Unless you can produce a signed and notarized gift letter for that amount, the court will presume the ledger to be accurate. The 30-day notice stands." Mark stared at me, his eyes burning with a hatred so intense it made my skin crawl. He saw the will not as my grandmother's final wish, but as my personal betrayal. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You will regret this," he snarled. "You're tearing this family apart over a few dollars." He grabbed Carol's arm and they stormed out, slamming the front door so hard that one of Grandma's teacups rattled on its shelf. The sudden silence was deafening. I felt shaky, my adrenaline fading into a deep, hollow ache. "You were right to bring me," Mr. Hayes said gently. "This is precisely the kind of thing your grandmother was trying to protect you from." I nodded, unable to speak. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to hold the proof, to feel the weight of the book that held Grandma's careful handwriting. "Her study," I murmured. "She kept everything in her study." I walked down the hall and pushed open the door. The familiar scent of lavender and old paper washed over me, but something was wrong. The room felt disturbed. Her roll-top desk, which was always impeccably neat, was slightly askew. A few papers were out of place. My eyes darted to the small inlaid drawer on the right-hand side, the one she kept locked, the one where she kept the ledger. The wood around the small keyhole was splintered, and the drawer was slightly ajar. My heart hammering against my ribs, I reached out and pulled it open. It was completely empty. A cold dread washed over me. They hadn't just been earmarking furniture before the will reading. They'd been searching. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back into the living room, my mind reeling. "It's gone," I whispered, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "The ledger." They took it. Mr. Hayes looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice calm, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding in my chest. "Think. Your grandmother was a meticulous woman. Would she keep the only copy of something so important in a single physical book?" His question cut through my panic. Meticulous. That was Grandma. She backed up her photo albums onto hard drives. She emailed herself copies of her favorite recipes, just in case. A memory surfaced, so vivid I could almost smell her lavender hand soap. We were in her study a few months ago, and she was showing me how to organize her digital bank statements. "Always have a backup, honey," she'd said, tapping the screen. "You never know when a leaky pipe or a clumsy son might ruin the original." A clumsy son. My fingers fumbled as I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking. I logged into my email account, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. In the search bar, I typed her name and the word ledger. My breath hitched. There it was, an email sent 6 months ago. The subject line read, "For safekeeping, honey." Attached was a single file, a perfectly scanned page-by-page PDF of the entire ledger, including the entry for Uncle Mark's $50,000 loan. The final meeting was at Mr. Hayes's office. My aunt and uncle walked in with an air of smug victory, assuming I had come to surrender. Mark didn't even bother to sit down. "All right, let's make this quick," he said, gesturing dismissively. We'll forgive the little stunt you pulled. Just sign the papers to make me executor and we can all move on." Mr. Hayes didn't say a word. He simply swiveled his laptop around on the conference table to face them. On the screen was the crystal-clear PDF of the ledger page, with the loan entry highlighted in yellow. Aunt Carol's face went white as a sheet. Mark stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "That's a fake," he finally sputtered. "You forged that." "Did I?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. "Because the email it was attached to has a timestamp from 6 months ago, and it was sent from Grandma's personal email account directly to mine. It's digitally verifiable. Grandma trusted me, not you." "Furthermore," Mr. Hayes added, steepling his fingers, "we now have a much bigger problem than an outstanding loan. We have the matter of breaking and entering your mother's private property, forcing a locked drawer, and theft of a key financial document, all of which are criminal offenses." He let that hang in the air. "So, here is the offer. You will wire the full $50,000, plus a mutually agreed-upon interest, to the estate account by the end of business tomorrow. You will also sign a document relinquishing any and all further claims on the estate, and you will never contact my client about this matter again. If you refuse, we will hand over the photos of the broken desk and the email from your mother to the police and let them handle it. The choice is yours." They paid. Every last cent. That evening, I sat alone in Grandma's armchair, the house quiet for the first time in weeks. The cloying smell of lilies and cheap cologne was finally gone. In its place, faint but clear, was the gentle, reassuring scent of lavender and old books. My grandmother hadn't just left me her house and her money. She had left me her trust and the strength to see it through. And that was an inheritance worth more than anything.